Greetings and welcome to a preamble just before the video that you're expecting to watch when you clicked on this. This month, Andy and I have reached a grand old age of 50 episodes, 50 months recording the watching brief. How do you feel about that, Andy?
I feel it's about time we grew up. If,
It's
if we're that old, we need to grow up.
it's certainly an opportunity to make some changes. And one of the things that we're wanting to do is shift from a monthly format that then we break up into smaller pieces once a month to something which is a bit more fleet of foot, something which is a weekly release, a shorter release, and a release that allows us to focus on different aspects of what we were already covering in the watching brief. I mean, Andy, you had some thoughts on the different segments we might do.
Well, the thing that I've got most interest in, obviously, is the news aspect, and I think going to a weekly rather than a monthly format means that we can be more news driven,
Mm.
and actually probably respond to more news stories than we would do in a normal monthly watching brief. We could cover more stories, probably in a shorter format, but it means we can pack more in, basically.
Well, pack more in, but also, I suppose, respond in a more timely fashion. So instead of waiting
Yes,
3 weeks to talk about something that's come up in the news, we can actually tackle
exactly.
it in that week. We
Yeah.
also want to chop and change some of this stuff, so it won't always be a weekly release. This is news driven. Some of it may be opinion driven, editorials. Some of it may well be inviting other people in for hot takes. For example, we've long been threatening to get Mr. Tristan Boyle on to talk about museums with Andy, and I'm looking forward to seeing that um, meeting of minds, shall we say? And also, we're separating out the media picks as well. We sort of hinted at that last month, but we want to be able to give that segment. Maybe have that segment be slightly longer, actually make it an hour as opposed to half an hour, perhaps. But a situation where we can engage with our love of media and the arts and archaeology in a way that allows it to breathe and is explicitly opinion and analysis driven. So hopefully it should mean more variety in a more timely fashion and in a way which encourages you guys to directly get involved in the conversation. So if you wanted to cover something in a given week or in the following week, you can send us an email and we will be able to get onto that in that following week. Um, keep an eye on us. I say it's been 50 episodes, and hopefully there'll be at least 50 more months to go. And enjoy the coming video. Cheers. Next, we come to a story that Andy and I were talking about privately a couple of days ago. I say talking. At one point, people had to come down from upstairs in Andy's house and ask if everything was okay because the conversation had become so passionate, shall we say, that they were wondering if Andy was genuinely angry about something. Um, and this is mainly because I was playing devil's advocate, or more, no, sorry, actually, devil's advocate is the wrong way of putting it, really. There, I
Yeah.
was playing angel's
You were
advocate.
you were advocating a position which I was taking a more nuanced view of, I would
Oh,
say.
whatever, whatever. Um, Nonetheless, this is a discussion that we were having surrounding the Benin Bronzes, and in particular, the news that the University of Aberdeen is set to return one of the pillaged Benin Bronzes in the very near future to Nigeria. And uh, well, I'll just read the opening of the Guardian article, and then we can go from there. The University of Aberdeen, ding ding ding, no, is set to return a
Seconds away,
controversial
round one.
controversial Benin bronze after a review found the item had been acquired in an extremely immoral manner. Quote, extremely immoral. As the Nigerian government calls on other British museums to reassess their collections. The bronze, which depicts Oba, a king of the Benin, was part of a haul of thousands of items taken when the British forces looted the Benin city in southeastern Nigeria in 1897, and it will be sent back within weeks, according to Aberdeen University. So, I'm not gonna relitigate the discussion that we had. I'm gonna try and avoid that.
No.
But how does this relate to, for example, the other Benin bronzes, and where should we expect this conversation to go in the near future?
Right. Okay. Um, quick bit of context. Uh, in 1897, the British colonial forces imperialist forces in West Africa
Hmm.
were in a confrontation with the Kingdom of Benin
Yes.
in what's now Nigeria. Um, a so-called diplomatic mission or trade mission was um, attacked by soldiers
Hmm.
from Benin, allegedly
Hmm.
unprovoked. Now, again, the accusation is that actually the whole thing was a setup, and the British were spoiling for a fight and looking for any excuse to invade the Kingdom of Benin.
Hmm.
The upshot was there was a quote punitive expedition mounted by the British Armed Forces, which looted and burned the city and took away thousands of individual items of art, um, including the bronzes which appeared in had religious significance. They appeared as decorations on sacred buildings and official buildings and so on in the kingdom. That they were central to the culture of the kingdom. So
Well,
in a sense, you're
I think
stealing.
it looked like art, other goods, materials such as ivories, these sorts of things. There's a
Abs-
photograph on the British Museum website, I think, that shows
yes,
soldiers sitting
yeah.
atop their loot.
Absolutely, I'm looking at the photograph now. There's these the British soldiers with their solar topes
Hmm.
sitting in front of bronzes and a pile of elephant tusks.
Hmm.
All of which would give these things that were sort of symbols of currency and wealth and status, and also had powerful religious and significance in terms of the history of the kingdom and the religion of the kingdom and the people. So basically, those collections were then taken back to Europe,
Hmm.
spread around Europe through being sold to collectors, bought up by museums,
Hmm.
um, collectors bequeathing their collections to museums, and so on. So there's probably even no central inventory of quite how much it is, although it's estimated that it's like you're never that far from a Benin bronze,
No.
certainly in terms of the museum world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the British Museum
Unless,
has
unless
probably
of course you live in Benin.
this is the point. This is the point. Um, we are where we are,
Hmm.
and alongside the decolonisation movement in museums, the idea that it's important to look not just at objects but the context of the objects, where they come from, how they were acquired, whether they were acquired legitimately, and whether it's legitimate to to continue to maintain them in the collection, whether they should be returned
Hmm.
to from whence they came. Um, Alongside understanding fully and explaining fully to the public who visit the museum how those objects came about, that they're not just there as a wonderful example of culture,
Hmm.
or look at those black people, aren't they clever, as might have been the case in the 19th century.
Or aren't they surprisingly clever?
Um, aren't they surprisingly clever to have made
Mm.
something quite so important?
Mm.
The sort of the fairground aspect of it.
Mm.
That all of that needs to be explained so that a modern visitor understands that, for example, a Benin bronze in the British Museum was not acquired through somebody from the BM going out there and choosing an item and negotiating with the local owner to buy it or have it loaned or whatever, but it was actually effectively stolen
Mm. Mm.
by officers of the British government.
Mm. Now, at this point, I would just like
We
to
get at this point. Oliver Dowden rings us up and says we're doing down British history.
Well, I don't think you are. I think I might be about to. At this
Go
point,
on.
I suppose what I would say is that again, I don't want to fully relitigate our conversation. But what I would say
Yeah.
is that I landed on the analogy, which, to be honest, I think you failed to adequately respond to. There were a couple of moments when you were visibly sort of because there's a simple ethical truth in this. First of all, it's interesting that the phrase punitive expedition is used in the Guardian article here. Whose right
Mm.
was it to be punitive against another sovereign group of people? That's an
Well,
interesting
now hang on.
concept,
Now,
isn't it?
well, right. No, you have to be careful here because um, there is a concept in international law that you are allowed to reciprocate. If somebody takes action against you, you're allowed to defend yourself. If somebody commits a
Defending
criminal,
yourself doesn't involve
if
going
somebody,
into their
what
royal palace and nicking everything. That's not defending yourself.
the argument then would have been, and you have to
But the thing
understand
is,
this.
didn't you just say
So
we are where we are?
we are where we are, but where we are has to involve understanding what happened in 1897.
Yeah, and what
And
happened was, in response to being attacked, we went and looted a capital. And we took all that lovely stuff. And the analogy that I landed on was if someone nicked my very nice computer. And after maybe a year or so, given that it's about 5 or 10 years future-proof, this computer, so very much still usable, very much something that I like and enjoy. After a year or so, the police find who stole my computer. Not only did they find it, but also they actually find that they took photos of themselves stealing my computer. And they've spent some time working on the computer. Maybe they've added some bits and bobs here. They've put a little note on it saying, by the way, we nicked this from someone else. And also they've done some homework on the computer as well. There's no realm, there's no way in which that computer is not mine. And I can't request that back. And in this instance, actually, we know it's even admitted on the British Museum website that the king has requested that stuff back. It hasn't been formally
okay,
written down, but there has been a request, a verbal request made. Why aren't we returning them?
right,
Contextualizing
okay,
it is one thing, but
right,
the ethical and moral question is, at the
right,
very least, one that needs to be addressed. Why aren't we returning them?
right. Okay. First of all, um, I do think that the sort of tectonic plates on this are shifting. Just in the last few weeks, and we're linking to various articles that describe this in more detail.
Hmm.
But in the last few weeks, it's become clear that, for example, there are going to be almost certainly returns from museums in Germany,
Yep.
and the German foreign minister has in fact visited Nigeria to discuss the matter with the Nigerian authorities.
Mm.
Um, so and those artifacts were acquired through the commercial museum supply and circuit
Okay.
in the
So,
in the
so
19th, early
they
20th
bought
century.
bits of the computer after it had been nicked. Okay.
You don't need to keep. I am agreeing with you that things are happening here and that
Uh-huh.
things need to happen here. Okay, what I'm saying is it's not as simple as that for various reasons. Now, also in the last few weeks, and in fact, there was not at the time of recording last night on Channel 4 News in the UK, one of the leading news programs. There was they ran an item on the Benin Bronzes because Aberdeen University, which also has Benin Bronze in its collection,
Mm.
has said that it's going to return it
Yes.
to Nigeria, and interviewed as well Professor Dan Hicks, who's written a book called The British Museum,
Brutish
um,
museums. Yeah.
Brutish Museum,
Mm.
which has been very well reviewed. It's also been attacked roundly by people, by the usual suspects, like the Telegraph,
Hmm.
but saying basically it's offensive that we still have these things. That there's no justification whatsoever for retaining them,
Hmm.
and they need to be they need to be returned.
Hmm.
There is a problem as far as the British Museum is concerned, and it's the same problem that applies to the Parthenon marbles.
Hmm.
which is that the British Museum collection is established by law and the trustees are not allowed to dispose of it without a change in legislation.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it is virtually inconceivable that a British government, and certainly the current British government, would pass that legislation.
So it's a little bit like the so-called
Now,
macho management we were discussing in the previous segment, whereby a concession of any sort is seen as weakness,
yeah,
letting go of this stuff, and essentially it's a political issue. It's not so much that
yeah.
because actually the people in the
Yes,
museum, the people that I know who work at the
mm,
museum, are lovely people. They really care about this material. They care for it
yeah,
for the good of humanity as far as they can.
yeah,
It's not within their gift to return this material. It
yeah,
is absolutely a political question. One for number 10.
yeah.
So,
It's
the question
it's
is,
also a question. Go on.
though,
Sorry, go on.
why aren't they being returned? If we are a civilized country, why aren't we acknowledging that we nicked it and returning it?
Right. Okay. I think there's a number of things in play here.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I would first of all make also the observation, which certainly Channel 4 pointed out last night, is that in its reserve collection, the British Museum has something like 1,000 Benin bronzes that aren't on display. They're in the reserve collection um, for research purposes. That's what
Hmm.
museum reserve collections are supposed to be for,
Hmm.
and also to be loaned out and so on as part of exhibitions and that
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Hmm.
Now, I think we have to start from where we are, not where we'd like to be. And certainly as far as the British Museum is concerned, yeah, Aberdeen have made their decision, and I have absolutely no problem with the decision they've made.
Hmm.
In their terms, they've made the right decision.
Yes.
I think there is a debate to be had about the value of a the idea of the Enlightenment idea of a museum as a cabinet of curiosities that is available to anybody to walk into for free to enjoy from anywhere in the.
I live in the north of England. I've been to the British Museum once in my life.
I
Even I
think,
can't benefit from them particularly well. And I'm not even from Africa. I'm not, well, no, obviously we're all originally from
and
Africa, but
that is a
I'm not
criticism,
African.
and that is a criticism of the British Museum's outreach policy. It's not. It's not.
You
You know,
can't
it's
do
not.
outreach to West Africa
Let,
from London. You can't unless
look,
you return materials. And I suppose
I
one of my points on this as well. Sorry, I know I'm talking over you a little bit here, is that we live in an age where high quality scans and 3D printing can reproduce these materials in a beautifully photorealistic, a coloured way as well, not just sort of plastic, that will be indistinguishable for people's experience when they go to the museum.
I don't
We
think
have
that's
the
true. I
ability.
don't think
We have
that
the
is true.
ability to copy these materials. I've seen
No, no,
human
no,
bone
no.
and metal
Let,
reproduced beautifully.
let me hang on. I need to develop the point here. I don't think it is true that the experience is the same. I absolutely agree with you that 3D printing has transformed our ability to
Hmm.
create these things. The fact that a laser guided lathe can produce an absolute facsimile of, say, for example, a marble statue.
And it's
And
only
so, yeah,
improving every year. It's getting better and better.
yeah, exactly. The technology is only going to get better.
Mm.
But any of us who are involved in archaeology know the difference there is in the feeling between seeing or handling a real Roman coin and handling a facsimile.
And if you
They're
want
not
to
the same
handle the real
experience.
thing, go to Benin and ask permission.
The point I want to
Get
make
research
here,
funding. It's a nice little trip to Africa.
the
You can see the real
point
thing if
I
you want
want
to.
to make here is
Hmm.
twofold.
Hmm.
One is that uh, I think from an education outreach, sharing with the public point of view, whatever we want to call it, however we want to dress it up, um, there are precedents for solving issues like this without. Put it this way: some smart thinking could sidestep this and defuse the issue without having to bash heads with the government, which would be only too delighted as part of its culture war against woke to bash heads on something like this.
Well, and
And
in that sense, that is an important part of what I suppose what you mean when you say we are where we are, in so much as we are living in a reality where our government is never going to do it. It's just not going to happen, um, despite the ethical concerns. Now, the thing is, you've linked to some stories linked with Irish collaboration, haven't you?
can I explain this? Because there's an analogy here,
Hmm.
right? Um, right. In 1915, an art collector called Sir Hugh Lane uh, drowned when the Lusitania was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland.
Hmm.
Lane had a collection in Dublin, where he lived, um, of modern art, contemporary art, and some
Hmm.
of the best of contemporary art, French Impressionists, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And in his will, he left the collection to the National Gallery in London. But in his desk after he died, when his belongings were being cleared, there was also an unsigned, unwitnessed codicil to the will, which said that the collection should remain in Dublin.
Hmm.
Now, at that time, Dublin was a part of the British Empire because the Republic of Ireland didn't yet exist,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
That now there have been ethical and legal arguments for the ever since over the last 100 years about where this collection should actually reside.
Hmm.
And just in the last um, in the last few weeks, uh, the National Gallery in London and the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin have reached an agreement. Basically, what they've agreed is that they're going to share the collections, share costs, and that some of the paintings, some of the collection will reside permanently in Dublin, some will reside permanently in London, and the rest of the collection will effectively become a travelling, rotating exhibition
Hmm.
shared between London and Dublin.
Hmm.
And and that's an agreement that's been reached between the two galleries. It's not at governmental level.
Hmm.
That's been reached between the two galleries.
Hmm.
And I think that is a very smart solution to a very crunchy ethical and legal problem. But
I agree. I agree. That is a way of not having to um, have a government which is hostile to the notion of this sort of thing, uh,
mm,
having to get involved.
mm,
But I would say that there's a fundamental problem with the analogy, and that is that this material was bequeathed to a museum by a citizen of that empire. Yes,
mm,
the status of Ireland has changed in the past 100 years or so,
mm,
but this was material that was bound for a museum somewhere on the British Isles, nonetheless. Depending on how you read the will, this is not the same as going to another group of people's capital city and stealing stuff from their palace. It's just not the same. And in that sense, I think
no,
ethically, this is such an important question that's not addressed at the moment, and it's just a fundamental one, and that is when those people want your things back, and you claim to be an enlightened, post-enlightenment civilization who've learned all the lessons from empire, an elder statesman of the world,
mm.
why the heck aren't we returning the material? And if people want to look at
I
it, they can travel and go and see it. You know, it's a simple question, and I don't think it's addressed in smart sharing mechanisms. Because so one of the things that the British Museum says on the website is they quote. Out of context, but we don't, you know, the context could be favourable or not, who knows? The quote that this material acts as an ambassador for Benin culture around the world.
yes,
That's a quote that the British Museum has got from officials in Africa on this,
yeah,
and that's true. But one of the crucial things about ambassadors is that they're usually chosen by the host state or by the state who's sending out
mm,
the ambassador. America chooses their own ambassadors. We choose our own ambassadors. Every civilized country on the planet chooses its own ambassador. We would we would be outraged if someone else had power over how one of our ambassadors, or a piece of material that represents British culture was being shown to the rest of the world. And it would be a humiliation for us to have to negotiate with someone else as to how, for example, I don't know, the Beatles are seen internationally. It's one of those things where it's a very simple, important question as to who owns that material, who rightfully is connected to it, and how that material continues to resonate and tell the story of the culture that it came from. And as it stands, there's no way in which it's not fundamentally tethered to London. When it was absolutely stolen. It was looted. It was a punishment beating from the British Empire.
Hmm.
I don't mean to talk you into into submission here, but I just find this to be so troublesome. It's such a difficult thing to resolve, and I understand that as you say, it's one of those things where actually the reality is that we can't. The British Museum can't give it back, if everyone in the building said we want to, they can't. Legally, it's not possible. Um, so
Now,
where do we go from here? I mean, in so much
okay.
as what 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 do you think is the best case scenario? Is it a sharing program? Is it a fundamental reassessment of what a museum is? I mean, frankly, I mean, even the fact that they have so many of them not on display, they have an
Hmm.
excess of them. They haven't even got the space to display them all, for goodness sake. It's it's a problem, isn't it?
Absolutely, and here it crosses over into other issues in museum ethics and museology, where we see colleagues discussing all the time about the ethics of collections, whether collections can be downsized, whether collections need to the way we regard collections need to be changed. Is a museum a repository forever, or should it be? Can it change? Can it dispose of one of the earliest things we covered on Watching Brief was Sekhem Kar at Northampton, where the council took an Egyptian statue, which the Egyptian government said it wanted back because they couldn't prove it left the country legally in the 1850s. Was sold by Northampton Council to the benefit of the council and the Earl of Northampton. An object that was 15 million quid. It's this is the thing. These are some of the most complicated issues in law as well, because of the distance in time. For example, the modern state of Nigeria didn't exist when the Benin Bronzes were taken back to Britain. In the same way that the modern state of Greece didn't exist when Lord Elgin did whatever deal he did with the Sublime Porte or its ambassador in Athens. So and the modern Greek government isn't the successor state of the Ottoman Empire. So that legally there are all sorts of complications here, and if international law means anything, they have to be addressed.
You see, again, but again, this is where we come back to simple ethical truths. We know where
The law doesn't deal with simple ethical truth. That's the problem.
no, but we know fine well where the Parthenon marbles came from.
Yeah,
We know the building; it's in the
yeah.
name, But
Where on the building they came from? Yeah,
exactly,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but also as well, there's another aspect here as well, and that is even within Britain, institutions like the British Museum are problematic. They are irresistible in terms of the way that they hoover up material from across these islands. I mean, I mentioned to you in our conversation previously the Mould Gold Cape, for example. That's in London because, of course, it's in London. It's shiny and it belongs in London. Why isn't it arguably displayed near Mould?
Okay,
Enliven
right.
enrich the local economy.
We talked about the dig earlier.
Hmm.
And the National Trust and the British Museum now have an arrangement where items from the Sutton Hoo collection are rotated through the British Museum to the Sutton Hoo Visitor Centre
Hmm.
in Suffolk, and they're changed every so often and so on. So the British Museum is getting better. I agree. Those are issues. Those are serious issues.
Hmm.
And we talked earlier about archaeology being done to people rather than done with people.
Hmm.
If that's to mean anything, that has to include the ability to see the things that you that come from your area. Now it's
What,
interesting
people
that the
in
Staffordshire
North
Hoard.
Wales being able to look at stuff that came from North Wales? Goodness me.
Look, the point. First of all, okay, the title, the British Museum, right? Okay, so it's there to have a representative collection. And I think it's interesting, for example, that one of the big stories in British archaeology in the last 20 years, Staffordshire Hoard, that is at Birmingham. It's not at the BM.
Hmm.
You know,
It was a close run
so
thing, though. It was a close run thing.
it was a close one. No, but the point is, Birmingham got the gig,
Hmm.
and so I think the museum world is getting better
Hmm.
at resolving these issues for a start.
Hmm.
You asked me where I think this is going. I mean, as I say, I think that the mood music, we've talked about mood music a lot in these discussions. The mood music is that the situation, the the ethical background is all pointing in the direction of, if not full restitution, then at least full acknowledgement of the origin of stuff. And I think, as I said, what is most likely in the short to medium term, certainly in the current situation in Britain, as far as the British Museum is concerned, and not talking about other museums, as I say, Aberdeen is able to make its own decision and has chosen to return its Benin Bronze.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that the most likely scenario, as far as the British Museum is concerned, short of a major rethink in government, is that it comes to an arrangement with Nigeria and uh, the Kingdom of Benin within Nigeria and the Oba, that the BM, for example, acknowledges that the Benin bronzes belong to Benin, that they were taken under circumstances which nobody can defend or justify,
Hmm.
and that as a result, there is going to be, as the Germans are talking about, a major program of supporting archaeologists and museums in Benin and work on the collections in Benin, and the permanent loan of parts of the collection, and, for example, a rotating collection between uh, London, Nigeria, and other museum centres. Yeah, that's the most likely practical scenario as things stand at the moment, I think.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's ideal,
Hmm.
and it doesn't answer the your particular point that they have to go, and they have to go physically back all to Benin now, if that's what you're arguing. I'm putting words in your mouth there, but
I'm
um,
I'm pri-
you know,
I'm primary. So one of the things that came out in our previous conversation
mm,
was so this is one issue. This is one instance. This is one set of artifacts.
mm,
I am not
yeah,
unilaterally making the case that everything in the museum automatically is emptied out, and then we have essentially a yard sale out front, and people say, "Do you want this back? You can. Okay, off you go." That's not what I'm suggesting. But in cases where acquisition is questionable, in cases where the inheritor state, given that they didn't exist 100 years ago, it's not, it's no, just because the British Empire is a long-lived thing doesn't
mm,
mean that the world doesn't change around it. If the inheritor state requests this material back, it needs to be given serious, proper consideration with a leaning towards the moral obligation to do the right thing. If we're wanting to have this new status in the world as Britain resurgent, then it should be
yeah.
Britain as the elder statesman, Britain as the post-imperial.
Rule Britannia,
No, well,
Britannia
no.
waves the rules.
Well, precisely. Britannia waives the
Yeah.
rules exactly, and in that sense, we need, if we are anything, yeah, in the world in a real way, if we are still anything, we are now a country that's coming to terms with, or should be coming to terms with, having once had an empire, and
Mm.
helping uh, to form the conversation on how that's managed, and how one section of humanity and its impact on the rest of humanity is a reality, and how we continue to negotiate our way through that, and things like collections of material that is actively, actually, genuinely, undoubtedly looted from that other group of people. How that is
Mm.
handled is important, and so. By no means, and I should just be clear, I'm not painting Andy here as someone who is an imperialist, so and so. Um, and also, I should say, as an academic, as an archaeologist, I I love museums. I love the benefit of being able to see a bit of this, that, and the other,
Mm.
and being able to compare objects and think about the way in which history and art and cultural interactions have changed and affected all this material. But my convenience is irrelevant in this, or should be irrelevant in this conversation, especially, as I say, in the context that if I really need to study that material, I can go to wherever it is now. I don't have to be, or frankly, even for me, as I say, here in the northeast of England, as someone originally from North Wales,
Mm.
the sphere of influence that the British Museum has is ironic in so much as it is total. Material tends to go towards London, but
Mm.
the ability to just to go and visit the museum to actually benefit from that stuff is not a given. A complex
No, look,
conversation.
it is a complex conversation. I'd make one last point, and I think it's one that, okay, I'm in a slightly privileged position. I live in London. When museums are open normally, as they have been until the last year, when we've all been renegotiating our relationships with organisations like that
Hmm.
online and so on, because of COVID. But up until this last year, for the last 10 years, I've been working on a project with a local primary school in one of the most ethnically diverse areas in London.
Mm.
And one of the things we do a project. The project's called Treasures. It was created by one of the teachers there,
Hmm.
Sophie Nicol.
Hmm.
And what Sophie did was take the idea of treasure that kids can understand, bring out pirate treasure, glittery stuff, and then get them to ask questions about actually what is a real treasure.
Mm.
And we get them to talk about, for example, something that they might treasure. So it might be a family photograph or a particular toy or something like that, which has no intrinsic value. Their toy that might be worth a few quid in a charity shop if it was put, to second hand or whatever.
Mm.
But to them, it's a treasure.
Hmm.
And so we get them to question
Mm.
and to question the whole issue of objects and what we value and whether we give them an emotional value or a financial value and so on.
Mm.
And we're doing this with 7 and 8 year olds, year threes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of the things we do, because we're able to, because we're in Greater London, it's very easy for us to get to the BM when it's open and use their very good education facilities.
Mm.
We take them to the BM and we show them that the Roman gallery, so they can talk about Britain.
Hmm.
And obviously, Romans happen to be one of my specialisms, so I can talk to them. And we get them, and we talk about particularly about the Vindolanda letters,
Hmm.
because and that they're a treasure because we can actually overhear Romans having conversations effectively.
Mm.
Is the way we present it in a way that kids can understand.
Hmm.
But we also always, and this is Sophie's idea, take them to the Africa Gallery and we look at them and we talk about the Benin Bronzes and we tell the kids where they came from,
Hmm.
and we explain the story. We explain why they're in the museum,
Mm.
and we have the discussion: should they be here or shouldn't they be here? And the point I would make is that in that circumstance, and I agree, as I say, it's a privileged circumstance. It's not a justification, but I think it throws up some issues that are worth thinking about in this argument.
Hmm.
A kid in the classes that we take whose family have West African heritage possibly has more chance of seeing the Benin Bronzes in London than they would do if they lived at home if they were living in Nigeria. But more importantly than that, although it enables those kids to value the culture that they come from and what their ancestors did physically in front of them, it also enables them to have the conversation with a white working class kid from London, whose heritage is from London or from Ireland or wherever, or a kid whose heritage is from Romania, or from one of the other 20 ethnic groups and languages that are spoken in that school. They can have the discussion between themselves as well about that. And I don't think it is as easy or as resonant to have that discussion about a facsimile.
They wouldn't know.
They would, because I'd tell them, because it would be dishonest not to.
But in that sense, then what you'd be telling them is we stole this stuff, and then we were good enough to return it.
That's not what we. No, that's not what we're telling them. That's not
No,
what we would tell them.
but you'd put the
As
facsimile in the context of an act of justice, returning something that was stolen. They could still take pride in the facsimile. I take pride in facsimiles all the time, Andy. I have to. I can't see the original Frank's casket up here in the northeast of England because it's in London and it doesn't travel. So I have to look at a facsimile. It's one of those things where facsimiles are useful. They are powerful, and in this
but
instance,
but
even
you're
even
missing
the,
there. They're second best.
yes, of course they're second best.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you're dealing with
What
stolen goods.
all I'm saying is that, and this was said in the Channel 4 piece. You've mentioned the British Museum website, which quotes the
Yeah.
Ogre of Benin, saying but I think there's those quotes. That quote from there, but suggests there is an underlying realism about this. That in the short to medium term, the most likely solution is likely to be some sort of shareback, however ethically messy that might be. In practical terms, in real politique of museums and government, that's the most likely solution.
Okay.
But, not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that's no. I'm looking at it, and as I say, the Germans seem to be going down a different route.
They do indeed. They do indeed.